First of all, thanks for coming. My name is John. I'm the CEO and co-founder of SpaceApe. I won't belabor the introduction because you're already here. I did think, though, that I would maybe give some context as to why we're doing this event before I hand it off to the guys who actually know what they're doing, by way of 2 points. I think the first point is that this event, and most importantly, the content that we're going to share in it is, as much as we talk about all of our successes, it's really birthed from our failures. SpaceApe's 5 years old. We got off to a good and a quick start, and then I think largely as a victim of that success, we got good at being pretty good. And we stopped being innovative, and we started doing the thing that would pay the bills for the next 6 months, and we fell into a trap that I imagine a lot of you can relate to. And we almost didn't recover from that trap. And at some point, we remembered that our mission was to make really awesome games and do new things on the platform for our players. And we had a lot of introspection about things we weren't doing, and what it really boiled down to is that we were deciding what games to make at the top, making them and launching them. There was no creativity taking place. The teams weren't really empowered, and none of it was happening at the beginning. There wasn't a whole lot of failure, like the kind of stuff that should happen. And so we underwent a process of introspection and fixing it. And I can't tell you that that process is done, or even that it's been successful. I can tell you that for the last few years, we've been doing stuff remarkably different than what we've done before, that we feel it's a lot better, and that certainly culturally, we find it's a lot more in keeping with what we set out to do as a company in the first place. So I think what you'll hear from Bill and Tom, certainly, and Matteo's going to talk about different stuff altogether, sort of a reflection of some of those things we've learned. And so I guess that's a segue to the second point, as for context of why we're doing that. And that point is that the best analogy I've ever heard about what we do, game development, is it's a tractor pull. Have you guys heard of tractor pulls? It's like this American invention. It's a giant stadium filled with mud and these big trucks, and they pull these massive weights, you know, and a bunch of people like me, Americans, all hooting and hollering. And it's really hard and really messy, and the trucks are successful if they pull these things like 100 meters. And that's game development. It's really difficult, it's really messy, and your primary opponent is not the other guy. Your primary opponent is the challenge of the work itself, which is phenomenally difficult. There's no one right way of doing it. There is no one expert. People are all over the map in their methodology. And to me, the point is that the game community in London could be, and really should be, a lot more cohesive and a lot better at sharing. In a way that we are not. And we have, through Supercell, gotten a lot of opportunity to see what the Finnish game scene looks like. And they share all the time. They have these weekly meetups at their version of pubs. They show their builds to one another. They learn a lot. And it's not that they're not competitive. They are competitive, and I'm competitive. So there's no bullshit involved. It's, I think, a realization that as competitive as we are, that the real opponent is not each other. The real opponent is what we do, and that we stand far more to gain from getting better at our craft and than we do from holding secrets, right? Now, I didn't always know that, but I've learned it in the last couple of years. And so maybe the point of this event is to try and spread the spirit of sharing that we've seen in Finland. We've done a bunch of them this year. That's the intent. I think the best one we're going to do, the second best one, this is the best one. The second best one we're going to do is going to be in January. Supercell's going to come out and co-host a thing called Games First. It's sort of the tentpole of that annual sharing cycle in Finland, where they just spill all their secrets, talk about game development, trade a bunch of notes together. So we're going to do that on January 17th. I'd encourage you all to go. And the second thing I'd encourage you to do is, this sharing thing is sort of incumbent upon all of us. We don't have the answers, not going to claim to. We've learned a lot. Hope you share what you've learned as well, and we'll gladly attend any event you host, and we benefit from it. So yeah, that's why we're here. I will hand it over to Sy now to talk about the details for tonight. Thank you very much for coming, guys. I appreciate it.
Hey everyone, so I'm Sy Watmough. I head up the client team here. So today for us is about kind of sharing some of the tips that we picked up about being creative and how you use that creativity to good effect. So we're going to have 3 talks. First we're going to have Tom talking about some of the tips and tricks he's picked up from his approaches to prototyping games over the last few years with us. we're going to have Bill Robinson talk about some of the tools that we built to help our teams either balance their prototypes or add what we call juice to our prototypes, which is the kind of UX stuff. And then Matteo is going to talk about how you bring your product to launch and really make use of all that creativity that you've put so much effort into. Lovely. Okay, so let's just get things rolling. I'd like to introduce Tom, who's going to come up and talk to us about razors and promises.
So let's see if this mic works. Can you all hear me?
Yep.
Perfect. So yeah, I'm Tom Mejias. I'm a client engineer here at Space 8 Games. I'm going to be talking to you about prototyping. That's on the slide. Yeah, so there's lots of challenges and learnings that I'm going to go through that I've found over the last 5 or 6 years of doing prototyping. I'm going to cover some of the preconceptions I had going into it, and then some of the mantras I figured out going forward to try and help me get out of that those preconceptions. I'm going to talk about Space 8's funnel and how we're doing new projects and how we're making things, and I'm going to talk about some prototyping thought strategies, which is just ways of organizing your thoughts and helping filter out a bit of the crap that comes with design. So yeah, so when I first started prototyping, you figure out that you just have to fail a hell of a lot. You just start things and you just fail. And then the good thing about all those failures is that you just learn so many cool things. So I'm going to try and get a few of these learnings and some of the problems and some of the solutions that I found, and let's see if this works. So the first problem, right at the beginning, is this misconception that I had. It was that you start off and you've got this idea for a mechanic or an interaction or something, and you go, right, I'm going to make that the best thing I can possibly do. So you go, and you do the worst code humanly possible, and it's just an absolute mess. And it always lives a little bit too long. It's just that thing where you start off and it's 2 days later, you're okay, I'm still going on this thing, and then a week later, you're oh my god, something's. So this slide, oh god. You start day one and you're great, I've made this great mechanic, it's a flick mechanic, I'm just really proud of it, I think it's great, and I've made this wall jump and it's got just the right amount of feedback and you're feeling really good about it. And then that all goes great, and then a week later, suddenly, your designer turns around and is that's great, you've done this great prototype, but I want your wall jump mechanic to now shoot fireballs, and I want your flick mechanic, which is really good, to now be a gyroscope thing. And you're oh god, you look at your code and you're why is my flick mechanic tied into my high score, and why is my wall jump talking to Facebook integration? So you're just it's just a mess. So at that point you're okay, I need to do something to stop this from happening, because it just kept on happening. And so I found that science would help. So I was I'm going to have to science this, and I'm going to have to figure out a way of stopping this from happening. But I'm not a very good scientist, so I started with mantras. Anyway, I started off with mantras, and my first one was to refactor obsessively. So what I mean by this is, and it sounds a little bit counterintuitive, because you think, right, I'm trying to race towards finding this mechanic, so why would I spend all my time refactoring? But I actually found it really useful to have this mantra. So I'd start, the next time I go into the cycle, I'd be okay, I've just added this system, and it looks really like this other system I've just added. Maybe I can find some commonality to make this a little bit simpler. So a good example of this is ability systems and spells and stuff like that. You start off with an ability and you're okay, I'm going to need mana, so you throw mana in there, into mana. And then you're I need a cooldown, so cooldown. And then someone's charge up time, okay, charge up time, blah, blah, blah. And then you're looking at it and you're going, God, I've all these 4 different systems and functions going off and doing random stuff, what am I doing? And if you'd just taken 5 minutes before I started that, after the second one, and gone, actually, I could have just made this a requirement system, and then consolidated that shit there, boop, and then now, next time I want to add a new thing, boop, I'll put that in, and great. So having this at the forefront of my mind when I'm doing things really helps me just stop and go, hang on, I'm doing something wrong here, I could make this better. Anyway, so the second problem I came up against, which is fairly similar to that one, is when your designer turns around and starts giving you really batshit crazy designs, and you're like, oh God, I should have thought about this earlier. Why didn't I think about this? And so, in order to combat not thinking about it earlier, I decided another mantra: think wide, build flexible. That sounds so wanky, but like, think wide and build flexible. So, the thinking wide part, that's just before you start doing a new feature. You go, okay, I'm going to sit down and spend 20 minutes, just figure out what is like the worst case scenario. What is it that someone's going to throw at me that will just like make my day just rubbish? And then I actually go, oh, rest of my team, you people, write down all of the things that could horribly go wrong with this system, or what things that you want to actually do with it. And then I look at this big list and go, okay, I'm not going to implement any of this stuff, but I'm going to look at it and go, if I just make this architecture, I can cut that bit out and do that. That's going to give me loads of value. And if I do this bit, that's going to give me loads more value. So it really helps just by taking a little bit more time at the beginning and thinking about these things. You can make much nicer systems that will architect better. Words. So yeah, to recap those points that I went at light speed: fail fast, fail efficiently, but learn. Refactor often, and refactor obsessively. And think wide and build flexible. These are all mantras that I put on the wall, just try and figure out what I'm doing and then try and follow them. That's the plan anyway. The next problem was you always have to defer things. So like you'll be making your game and you're like, this UI system, I don't actually want it to just immediately shoot I've just gained some XP in a level or something, and you go like, big dialogue on your screen, and then another thing comes up with a video ad, and then a tutorial thing comes up, and then like it's just a mess of different things going on. So a way to stop worrying about like all these deferred actions and delaying things and ignoring things is that you've got to assume that any action that you make in the game will have to be at some point deferred or delayed or transitioned or any other words that means the same thing. So I've tried like a ton of different architectures over the last few years, because every time I start a new code base, I'll just try some new things and see how it goes. And I've tried like entity component systems and like all the model view stuff and event buses and signals and all of these things and coroutines. And at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter which of those you choose, really, as long as you're consistent in your use of them. The problem is when you start mixing all your adapters together and you start like having one system talking to another system. You've used one system for tutorials and another system for another thing. So one of the learnings I had was make sure you upfront choose your architecture for deferring actions, but always be consistent that you use that one pattern. So yeah, just what I just said in words. Wonderful. Aha! That's what it says. So I came to a realization at that point that was, it sounds really obvious now, don't write bad code fast. Write flexible code, it will make you fast. So that's the main learning that I had in that section of the stuff. And I think it's really important, because I just didn't get it at the beginning, and now I kind of do. I'm going to switch gears. Look at that GIF, it's great. Woo. I'm going to talk about the project lifecycle a bit. So it's really important to know where you are on the project lifecycle. I've found in my experience that starting at a game jam and writing something specifically around a mechanic and around a moment that you want to experience, and ignoring everything else, doing that whole bad code thing I told you not to do, doing that at the game jam stage is really important. And then once you go into the prototyping phase, it's a totally different beast. At that point, you've already answered whether the mechanic is fun, and you're trying to answer other questions like, is this going to scale? Will it work in PvP? How can I remove something without breaking everything? How can I balance this shit? So then once you've answered those questions, then you go into the production loop and you execute, and then you're like, oh shit, I've got another unknown. I better loop back into prototyping, go off onto a branch, do your shit, and then come back and do the production stuff again. So it's really important that you know where you are on this, because it'll determine what type of code you write. I'm just going to delve a little bit deeper into each of these though. So you start off with game jams, which is a bit like an elevator pitch. Darth Vader is your early investment chap, and you're like, oh, I've got this great idea. You get this item and it gives you 15% extra health, and then you don't get it until you finish the first boss, but and then that's going to be a terrible thing to show in your prototype. What you really want to show is this badass mechanic that you can build the whole thing around, and you want to have like these fake UI systems bouncing in the background, pretending to have depth and hinting at depth. In code terms, you want to focus on the mechanic and then ignore the rest, but like focus on the UX and the mechanics. Prototypes are completely different. You've already got that, and you're wanting to figure out all of the questions around it. In code terms, you really want to be flexible. You want to be able to change your code as fast as your designers change their mind, and that's going to be like every 35 minutes at the slowest. Anyway, at this point, you want to value flexibility over almost anything. Production is just like easy. You're just like, oh, I know everything. I'm just going to go make it. And at that point, you're like, easy. But then you want to go back and forth, and not that way. You want to go back and forth between these continuously. Yeah. Anyway, here's it in graph form in case you needed it a third time. These are the things. And I'm pointing at my screen here. Yeah, so far so good, I think. The next problem I found, and this is interesting actually, that we've got pretty good at rapid development now. We're making the right things, and we're talking really fast, and we're doing the right things. But one of the main problems is figuring out how to keep your vision, how to keep your mind on what you're actually trying to achieve in the prototype, and what your vision is. So we came up with this system called the Promise, which is another wanky name, but it'll do. The idea is it's a really good way of maintaining a strong vision throughout development, because often you'll go off onto different paths, and then you'll go like, shit, this doesn't fit within the game whatsoever, why did I come down this path? The idea is that at the very beginning of the project, you write this vision statement, which is like a one-line promise of what you want the users to experience in the game, what you want the game to be. And you get the whole team to agree on this. You kind of spend at least an hour or several hours discussing it and figuring out, this is what I want to be. Then, whenever you start a new feature, you continuously reflect on that. You go, does this feature I've just added or I'm about to add fit within this vision, this one-line statement? And you're like, shit, it doesn't. Or if it does, then great, you just carry on and make it. But if it doesn't, then that's a really good discussion point for your team, because it could mean one of two things. Either the idea doesn't fit in the vision because it's a bad idea, or it doesn't quite fit with the thing you're trying to achieve, or your vision is flawed and you need to change the vision in order to encapsulate this new idea. So having that discussion with your team and then evaluating, that's the click, evaluating all the things that then make it fit into that vision and making sure you're honest to it is really important. But it also helps you change your vision as early as possible, because the last thing you want is to get to near the end of a prototype and be going like, oh shit, we've just been doing the whole thing wrong, and then all the decisions you made up to that point are like invalid. So it's a good way of just keeping that thing. So you put it on the wall, this is my vision statement, and you just keep yourself honest to it. So I'm going to talk about the Space 8 new project funnel, because we're doing some really interesting things, and Space 8's on this journey to try and, just like John said, to try and own a genre. We're trying to find really interesting ideas that will make us big. We want to do these like incrementally successful titles. We want to just get something that's really good. And that takes a lot of work, and it takes a lot of processes, and it takes a very big change in the way that we do things. So we came up with this system called the funnel, which is open for the whole company. And the idea is that every couple of months, or every month, there's a few days where employees are encouraged to do like game jam prototypes, they're encouraged to do one-liners and things like that. So you're getting this creativity going within the company. After these ape spaces, which is what they're called, a few of these teams will organize, they'll self-organize into teams, and they'll be working on these ideas like in their own time and like in lunch times and things like that. They'll get really passionate about them, they'll be feeding off the buzz of the company and stuff. At that point, if it's identified that this idea is really cool and people like it, that we'll be able to spin up a team and spend a little bit of real time making these into prototypes, like formal prototypes, and working towards milestones. And then if they're successful in that milestone, then they can go through to like meta playables and branding playables and meta playables with branding and all the rest of these things. So that's really useful. We encourage all the time at each of these stages for the teams to be autonomous. So they're all making their own decisions. They're empowered to fail. They're empowered to do exactly what they want as long as they have a license to kill. They want to look at their prototype and go, actually, this is no longer fitting the vision of the company. Maybe I should kill it. Or maybe we should have a discussion about that anyway. But it's up to the team to kill it. And this is a really good way of getting lots of ideas in the top of the funnel and filtering them down, and hopefully we'll have a nice one coming out the bottom. And it was a really exciting time, and we were doing lots of really good prototyping iterations and stuff. But we came to a few problems, and I'd like to just talk about a few of those problems. Problem number one was there were too many ideas and not quite enough time to cover all of these ideas. And so we needed like a system to help us filter these out, like get rid of the chaff, work on the things that actually mattered. And so we came up with this really bad, I'm going to warn you, it's a really badly named thing, and you shouldn't use this name, Takeshi's Doors. So I don't know if you've watched Takeshi's Castle, but like there's this sequence where you're like running through a set of doors, and like there's a samurai going like, "Rrr," and sometimes you bounce off the door and you fall over and then you lose the game. It's nothing like that. I don't know why we called it this. So there are some doors, and at the time we were working on mobile asynchronous strategy games. That was our little crate that we were working in. And we had loads of ideas, and we were struggling trying to pin down an idea. So we made this idea where you have a set of doors in a line, if you will, that you have to get through. And if you don't get through all of them, then you kind of think the idea's not that great. And the ideas that the name of the doors were mobile first, as in, will this work on a phone? Is it going to be a good game on the phone? Are you going to be able to enjoy it on the phone? Evergreen, as in, can you imagine someone still playing this idea, this hypothesis in day 365? Like, are you going to be able to make enough content? Scalable, are you able to make enough content with a small team? Is this 2-man, 5-man team going to be able to make enough of this stuff without becoming a content treadmill that you'll never get over? Player-driven content. Are you able to create challenges from the PvP, or player design strategies, or things like that? And opportunity for mastery. Is it going to have the low skill floor that you need in mobile, but then a long and winding good path of mastery that you'll enjoy for a long time? So what we did was we rated each of our ideas as we were going into the funnel on each of these categories out of 5 or something, just to try and figure out whether or not they'd be good ideas. And so if they was rated low in 1 or 2 of them, we were like, okay, maybe we can fiddle it. But if they rated low in loads of them, they were like, shit, this idea's wonderful, let's throw it onto the pile. It's a fairly subtle thing, but it let us like get rid of loads of stuff before we even went into it. The next problem we faced was, and this is something that it took me ages to articulate this one, and I was like scratching my head, and I don't know. So there's this thing that happens when you're making games, or making prototypes, where you start off and it looks like crap because it's a prototype game coder art, and you're like, okay, this game just isn't deep enough, it's not fun enough, it's too simple. So you add a bunch of systems in there, and suddenly, and a bunch of rules, and suddenly it goes into production, and you start polishing it, and you add visual complexity, and suddenly the whole thing is too complex, and you're like, oh god, when did this happen? This wasn't the same in the prototype phase. You've done something wrong, production team. Actually, this is another really badly named thing, the complexity matrix. This is another strategy I came up with to try and filter, to stop that from happening. It's actually a chart. So I figured that all complexity in games is kind of in 3 categories. You've got your visual complexity, so that's visual noise, particle effects, camera shakes, UI juice, like Bill will talk to you about later, and all the rest of that stuff. That's visual complexity. You've then got cognitive complexity, which is like the rules, all of the different game rule combinations, all of this game state awareness, like I know that guy's over there and this guy's over here, and shit, the red guys are about to take the space, and all of these extra things. Then you've got interaction complexity, which is I'm tapping like this, or I've got to do really complex movements on the screen, or your input cadence and all those other things. What I found, if I rated each of the games that I was working on, the prototypes, continuously throughout the development, out of 5 in each of these categories, and then added them up, I found that, internally we found that 7 was about a good number for them to be at. But if you were too much lower than that, and your game was probably going to be a little bit too shallow, and if it was too much higher than this, it was a bit too core. And you always left a little bit for the visual stuff, because you knew that was going to come in later, and you knew it was going to be a bit complex. So it was actually a really interesting system for trying to filter out these silly, I'm going to say, I think I know what I'm going to say, the thing where you go off in a tangent, the thing I'm doing right now. Anyway, if you take one takeaway away from this whole section, is that the longer you spend in rapid development, and any sort of development, is that you'll find that these common problems that you're constantly butting up against, and as soon as you identify that this is a problem that you're having, you need to stop as a team, you need to evaluate what that problem is, and then you need to figure out a process. That could be a mantra like I've done, or it could be a strategy like I've done for the other things, that will cover those specific problems. Because if you just let it go, that's going to be the biggest hit to your velocity. So by solving those things as soon as they crop up and figuring out them and learning to detect those patterns, that's where it's going to get you the most speed. So I'm going to just recap the bunch of stuff. So the mantras I had at the beginning, they were fail fast, fail efficiently, but always learn. I then had refactor often and obsessively, and I had think wide and build flexibly. I then had this pithy, don't write bad code, write flexible code, because that's good. I then had be comfortable deferring actions, but be consistent in your pattern use. And it's really important to know your place in the project lifecycle. And then the point I just made about creating thoughts, structured thoughts and mantras, and being on top of the issues before they come out. And also, the way that SpaceX, we've managed to get teams autonomy. So I don't know if you guys are in dev teams, but if you are, fight for your autonomy, fight for being able to do your own thing, but always keep the company's goals in mind. Yeah, so that we're going to be putting some stuff on the blog, but yeah, that's about it for me.